Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 19th of August, 2015. Taking a look at the track for Tropical Storm Danny. Forecast still to become a hurricane as it heads in the general direction of the Northeast Caribbean here. If it doesn't become a hurricane, which would obviously be great news from an impact perspective, certainly, maybe as a tropical storm at best, as the strongest, it would be. I'm trying to paint a good picture here that it could bring some rainfall without all the other nasty impacts, even if it's a degenerated storm into an open wave. This area through here desperately needs the rain, but you don't need 10 to 15 inches of it. So not being a hurricane or even a tropical storm probably would help, although tropical waves, if they're not moving very fast, tropical depressions, and certainly tropical storms can dump a lot of heavy rain, so you have to be careful what you wish for. This region is in a pretty serious drought situation, and so the moisture is needed, just not the other impacts. Looking at the wide shot satellite picture of most of the Atlantic Basin, Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean clear as a bell. Then you get out here into the open Atlantic, and here is Tropical Storm Danny, with its one little lone thunderstorm of convection, which is basically the same thing, sitting right over the center. And you can see that here. The convective activity literally blows up right over the top of the center of circulation there over the last few frames. It's moving off to the west-northwest here, probably 10 to 12 miles per hour, something like that, and fighting the dry air around it. Very vigorous low-level circulation, no doubt about that. It's got a great structure as far as the low-level, low-pressure center. It's all there, but the dry air around it, as I'll show you here, is still a major inhibitor. All this yellow and orange color, actually I guess it's mostly orange, indicative of fairly substantial Saharan air, still on sort of the less side. You see the little scale down here. This is from the University of Wisconsin. So, we're not looking at any of these pink colors in here, but nevertheless, I think there's enough dry air and dust in here that comes off Africa. It gets blown off with these eastern, what do you call it? It's an African easterly jet, basically, that comes from the east at about, I think, 700 millibars or so in the atmosphere, something like that. They're about midway up in the atmosphere, and maybe towards the lower levels to mid-levels, and it comes blasting out of Africa several times per season with these enormous areas of warmer, dust-laden air, and it's called the Saharan air layer, and that is not good for something to develop in or to plow through, as we see here with the forecast for Danny over the next several days. And if it gets through the dry air, check out the wind shear. This is the Caribbean Sea, and that wind is just screaming across against where Danny would be coming from. And so if it runs headstrong into this core of upper level winds, it'll literally be torn apart. Now, these things change. We don't have a static weather pattern, and Danny is moving through that. Everything's changing all the time, so it's possible that the shear could let up a little bit, though I'm not seeing much indication of that in the models, that's for sure. And as such, we're seeing a spread in the intensity guidance here, whereas a couple of days ago, you had a lot of them just kind of aimed up like this, and maybe a couple of stragglers that were saying, yeah, it's not going to do much. Now, you have a spread between a lot of the different models over time, all over the place, from weak tropical storm to barely a Category 2 hurricane on some of them, and that tells me that there's more uncertainty in the intensity, whereas the track is generally, tightly clustered here on a west-northwest heading somewhere towards the Northeast Caribbean Sea in about 5 days. So we'll see. Danny's going to be interesting. It has a lot of hurdles to go through, quite literally, and if it makes it, then we can talk about what the impacts may or may not be, first for the Caribbean, and then we can worry about down the road from there. Elsewhere in the tropics, an area, sort of an upper level low that's going to try to transition into more of a subtropical storm over the next few days in the vicinity of Bermuda. I can show you that on this satellite picture, there's Bermuda right there. And here's that upper level low spinning around, kind of stuck out here. And so I think what it's going to do is try to develop a more banded structure to it that resembles a tropical storm, more so than it looks now, but it probably won't have time to fully transition to what we would see, like coming off Africa, like Danny, and where its origins came from. This is more of your hybrid or mutt, if you will, and it might try to develop more subtropical characteristics where the winds are spread out over a larger area. You don't have a necessarily tight, warm core, so to speak, like an eye, for example. And nevertheless, though, bringing some rain and a few squally conditions to Bermuda down here over the next few days. And it looks like it'll kind of rotate around and then eventually move on off to the north and east with time. And that's about it. In the Atlantic Basin, of course, there are a pair of powerful typhoons in the Pacific, neither of which should directly impact land in terms of a landfall, but they are both certainly worth watching, and you can, of course, track those in Hurricane Pro and HD because you have global tropical cyclone tracking capabilities, which is nice. So check that out. Super Typhoon, I can't remember which one is super. That's just kind of a designation. We call ours major hurricanes when they reach a certain strength. But they're typhoons Goni and Atsani in the western Pacific. Luckily, I think Taiwan will be spared a direct hit, which is great considering what they just went through. All right, well, that's it from me for today. You are now up to date, especially on what's going on with Danny. Again, to recap real quick here, dry air, shear ahead. Hey, if it makes it through those hurdles, then let's talk and see what happens after that. Until then, I have my doubts that it's going to do very much, but we'll see. At least it's over open water and not really bothering anybody out there right now except shipping interest. Have a good rest of your Wednesday afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. As always, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com and, of course, Hurricane Pro and HD. I'll be back again tomorrow with another look at the tropics.